you're absolutely right. Were he to economically pressure a country into conceding territory, that would put us maybe not on par with Putin, because Putin's not doing it with economic pressure. He's doing it with the bullet, with the shield and the sword, and killing a lot of Ukrainians. But still, it would be massively inappropriate for the United States as the leader of the democracies.
We are back on the road to the White House with the inauguration of Donald Trump for the second time to become the 47th president of the United States, having already been the 45th, just days away. Now, yesterday, you may have heard this during a news conference. The president-elect, he was asked if he could provide assurances to Panama and Greenland, which is owned, as it were, by Denmark, that he would not use military or economic coercion to get control of the regions.
You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China.
Well, we all heard it. He didn't brush aside the notion and the question as absurd. He said he's not going to rule the idea of that kind of coercion out. And by the way, he also said he wanted to see changes to NATO defense spending.
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, they're in dangerous territory. I think they can all afford it, but they should be at 5%, not 2%.
Now, let us talk to former United States Security Advisor, Rear Admiral U.S. Navy, Mark Montgomery. Hello to you, Mark. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Really, really keen, Mark, to get your thoughts on some of this. Now, hearing that, I mean, even for the president-elect to refuse to rule out the use of force to take possession of the territory of a NATO ally, because, as Donald Trump said, it's important to America, we can see why that's being criticized by some as rather imperialist.
So, look, I think you need to take this in two ways. One, there's a little bit of trolling involved in here. There's a little bit, certainly what he did with Canada earlier in the 51st state was that. But look, there's not going to be a military intervention in Greenland or Panama. But what there is going to be is significant pressure put on those countries. So what I would take is the very explicit part where he said, I'm not setting aside the idea of a military or economic pressure. Economic pressure, I think, is in there. And look, in that case, he has this is a legitimate plan, to put pressure on these countries, to tell Panama, I'm unhappy with you, so that Panama divests Chinese ownership of some of the ports, really the operations of the ports in the vicinity of the Panama Canal. That's much more what I think we're seeing here.
Okay. I mean, you would think in anything like a normal world, the idea of U.S. forces being used to secure control and ownership of the territory of a NATO partner ought to be absolutely inconceivable. But there he was, the president-elect, not ruling it out. Was that in itself, though, Mark? Was that entirely a presidential way of going about things?
Making the inconceivable conceivable is not presidential, right? So, the short answer is no. But the long answer is you should come to expect this. And in fairness to Trump, he's been, harking on this Greenland issue for 6 years, since 2019. The Panama one's a little more recent. I'll bet it's tied to some Panamanian legal actions with Trump Industries, Trump hotels and things. But from my perspective, the Greenland one's a serious issue to him, that he's been briefed how important it is to security, the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. He looks at Denmark and says, you don't spend much on defense. You certainly don't spend enough in Greenland, to use it as a hub in countering Russia. And so that part of it's a legitimate pressure campaign, but I think it's done in sort of a trolling way, not legitimate way. And he would have no authority to conduct combat operations against a NATO ally, or even in the case of Panama, where it was a treaty agreed to by the Senate that transferred the canal.
Well, I mean, Admiral Montgomery, you do not imagine then we could see U.S. landing craft pitching up on beaches in Greenland as a kind of invasion. That's entirely inconceivable to you.
It is entirely inconceivable to me.
All right. Now, even if we're talking, though, about economic coercion, the use of tariffs and so on to achieve the same end, to lay claim to and take Greenland, if that were to be the sort of coercion we're talking about, to take the territory of another sovereign country, if that were to be done, how could America criticize Putin or Xi of China? Because they are criticized for exactly the same kind of threats to a place like Taiwan.
First, I do have to point out that hypocrisy is it's a color Trump wears well. So, I mean, you got to be careful with that. On the other hand, I don't even think it'll be that kind of economic pressure. I think just like with when he talks about, comprehensive tariffs, he ends up narrowing them and then not applying them when he gets the kind of concessions he's looking for. Look, Trump legitimately sees imbalances in our relationship with some partners, and the defense spending was part of that. He wants to bring pressure to bring what he sees to be parity.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Were he to economically pressure a country into conceding territory, that would put us maybe not on par with Putin, because Putin's not doing it with economic pressure. He's doing it with the bullet, with the shield and the sword, and killing a lot of Ukrainians. But still, it would be massively inappropriate for the United States as the leader of the democracies.
Still a remarkable thing to hear from you, Admiral Montgomery, about the incoming president. Now, what about the demand by Donald Trump for 5% of national earnings among NATO partner countries to be spent on defense? America doesn't spend 5%, but the question is, if they don't live up to that demand, then what? What next?
So look, I think 5% is his opening gambit. I think it would be very reasonable for the president-elect, to settle on 3% and say, look, I demand 3%. And by the way, I'm not sure Mark Rutte, I don't think the NATO Secretary General is far off from that. 2% was a good first step. And by the way, there's still almost 10 NATO countries that haven't met that. They need to get up to 2%. And then they need to all come up to 3%. By the way, the ones closest to the fire, the Baltic states and Poland, are well above 3%, are at 3%.
Yeah.
Or heading, in the Polish case, well above it. My point on this is they got to get there. And you are right. The United States has actually declined under President Biden from 3.4% of GDP to just a flat 3.0 right now. And I'm hoping that this, President Trump's discussion of this 5% for Europe, maybe settling on 3%, is also an indication.
Maybe more of that deal making.
5%, not 2%. But at that point, it was super. Many people didn't pay. Some people didn't pay anything. But many people will wait, including Germany. Germany was at less than 1%.
So you're going to press for 5%?
Well, I think NATO should have 5%.
And you don't like Ukraine?
Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're